Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Robert L. Owen. Today's story is Robert Latham Owen, one of Oklahoma's first senators, and honestly, he's hard to fit into a neat box. He went from a family crash after the Panic of 1873 to becoming a lawyer, newspaper owner, Indian agent, reform politician, and co-author of the Federal Reserve Act. He also left behind a pretty tangled legacy, especially on native land policy, banking power, and even his later attempt to rewrite who was really to blame for World War I. Owen's early life started with privilege in Virginia, and then that vanished fast when his father's railroad wealth was wiped out in the Panic of 1873. His mother ended up supporting the family by teaching music, and with scholarship help, he finished at Washington and Lee as valedictorian in 1877. That kind of reversal clearly shaped him. In 1879, he moved west to Indian Territory and basically rebuilt his life through institutions on the ground there. He taught Cherokee orphans, practiced law, worked in education administration, owned a newspaper, served as a federal Indian agent, ran a bank, and eventually entered national politics. That matters because he didn't come into the Senate as some distant reformer parachuting in with big ideas. He came up through local service, especially in and around the Cherokee Nation. His Cherokee identity was part of his public image too, though the exact ancestry was disputed. The Dawes Rolls listed him as 1/16th Cherokee, while his mother's memoirs could suggest 1/32nd. Still, it wasn't just a blood quantum argument. His mother was raised among Cherokees and gave him the name Okonostota, so the identity had real cultural meaning in his life and politics. Before he got to the Senate, Owen became nationally known through the Eastern Cherokee compensation case. In 1906, he won nearly $5 million from the federal government for lands lost during Indian removal, and that victory gave him real stature just as Oklahoma was heading into statehood. Earlier, as federal Indian agent from 1885 to 1889, he pushed compulsory arbitration to handle thousands of civil disputes in Indian Territory. At the time, there was a legal vacuum because the first United States court there hadn't been established yet. So on one side, you can see Owen as someone trying to build order and secure compensation in a system that had failed Native communities over and over. But this is where the contradictions come in. Later, he backed removing federal restrictions on the sale of individually allotted Indian lands. He argued those protections were paternalistic, bureaucratic, and bad for economic development. Tribal critics saw something much harsher. Creek leader Moti Tiger and others said lifting those restrictions would wreck communal structures and leave Native people exposed to exploitation. They accused Owen of favoring policies that would enrich financial interests, including possibly his own circle at Native expense. So even where he framed himself as anti-bureaucratic and modernizing, many people experienced that as deeply threatening. Owen's biggest national achievement was helping create the Federal Reserve in 1913. The fight was really about who should control money and credit, private bankers or the federal government. Owen rejected Nelson Aldrich's more bank-dominated plan and put forward a compromise with a government-appointed central board, government-backed currency, and regional reserve banks. That compromise won out after the Senate rejected Gilbert Hitchcock's more centralized version by a razor-thin 43-41, then passed Owen's Bill 54-34 on December 19th. Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act 4 days later. The final system was intentionally mixed. Washington got public supervisory power, while the 12 regional reserve banks were largely controlled by major banks. And Owen never stopped arguing about what that hybrid became. Later, he said, big bank interests had effectively captured the Fed and pushed destructive deflation, especially in 1920 to 1921, and again from 1929 to 1933. In the 1930s, that sounded fringe. Later, after Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz published their monetary history in 1963, the idea that contractionary policy helped cause the Great Depression became much more influential. Owen also said his own vision was bigger than the final law. He claimed he had wanted the Fed required to maintain a stable price level, but that language was stripped out in the House through what he called the secret hostilities of major banking interests. If you're trying to place Owen politically, he was a full-on progressive in the early 20th century sense. He pushed direct election of senators, women's suffrage, initiative, referendum, recall, campaign finance disclosure, and stronger antitrust enforcement. He helped get the Oregon system of direct democracy written into Oklahoma's state constitution, and a lot of what he backed ended up looking ahead to the 17th and 19th Amendments. One of the more vivid episodes came in 1911, when he filibustered for Arizona statehood for 12 straight hours. Republicans opposed Arizona's initiative, referendum, and recall provisions. And they also expected Arizona to elect Democrats, which did not exactly improve the mood. When someone told Owen that President Taft wanted to negotiate, he replied, "At present, I am engaged in addressing the presidents of the United States." That's a line with just enough theatrical confidence to survive a century. He also co-sponsored the Keating-Owen Act in 1916 to block interstate commerce in goods made with child labor. The Supreme Court struck it down in 1918, but later constitutional developments moved toward the principle he was trying to establish. And he spent years pushing for cabinet-level departments of health and education, which didn't happen then, but foreshadowed the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in 1953. After World War I, Owen's politics took a pretty sharp turn. He had supported Wilson's international policy and the Treaty of Versailles at first, but by 1923, he was rethinking the origins of the war in a big way. Using newly published Russian diplomatic documents, he argued that Imperial Russia and France carried more blame than Germany, and that the post-war settlement should focus on reconciliation instead of continued punishment. He laid this out in a book called The Russian Imperial Conspiracy, 1892 to 1914, arguing that Russian mobilization triggered the Continental War. Professional historians were not impressed. They criticized the book as polemical and methodologically weak. German officials, on the other hand, were happy to circulate it, buying and distributing 1,500 copies because it supported their campaign against the Versailles war guilt clauses. Part of this shift seems tied to how far Owen had drifted from the political center after 1920. His own presidential run got just 33 votes on the first Democratic Convention ballot and never got beyond favorite son territory. His post-war proposals for expanded credit and league membership also went nowhere, and you can feel the distance opening between the reformer he had been and the outsider he was becoming. Owen served from 1907 to 1925 and was re-elected repeatedly, even with major fights swirling around banking, land policy, and corporate influence. He also kept a mailing list of around 300,000 names, which is a very early version of building your own national audience. Different technology, same instinct. His alliance with Carter Glass over the Federal Reserve curdled into a long, bitter credit dispute. Glass mostly minimized Owen's role, and Owen deeply resented being treated as secondary. That clash was also philosophical. Owen was a progressive democratizer, while Glass was a states' rights Democrat and segregationist. After retirement, Owen endorsed Herbert Hoover in 1928 because he disliked Al Smith's opposition to prohibition and ties to Tammany Hall. He later regretted it, came back to the Democrats in 1932, and supported Franklin Roosevelt. Then, in one of those wonderfully odd late career turns, he spent his later years developing a phonetic global alphabet meant to teach English worldwide. So Owen's legacy is big, influential, and messy all at once. He helped shape modern banking, pushed major democratic reforms, fought for Cherokee compensation, and also backed policies many Native critics saw as harmful and exploitative. He's one of those figures who makes history feel less tidy and a lot more human. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.